What are hazards and why is it so difficult for us as SHEQ practitioners worldwide to identify them correctly in our workplaces? Hi there, my name is Andrea de Pre and I will be your tutor for this lesson. After watching this video, you should hopefully have a better understanding of what hazards really are, what their unique characteristics are, and how they constantly interact with each other. So let's get started. Clause 6.1.2 of ISO 45001 states that hazard identification should aim to determine proactively all sources, situations or acts, or a combination of these arising from an organization's activities with a potential for harm in terms of injury or ill health. As a result, many SHEQ practitioners assume that all sources, situations and acts that poses health or safety risks to people or the environment are indeed hazards. To be clear, ISO 45001 does not state that all sources, situations or acts that poses health or safety risk are hazards. Clause 6.1.2 merely states that all sources, situations or acts arising from an organization's activities must be evaluated during the risk assessment process to determine their potential for harm. Now, it would be very easy for us as SHEQ practitioners to blame the International Organization for Standardization and in some cases even our very own legislators for such ambiguous hazard descriptions. However, part of the blame will always remain with us if we don't educate ourselves properly and if we are complacent in the performance of our tasks. Complacency is, after all, the kiss of death for any SHEQ professional. Further to this, part of the problem may also be the way in which we conduct our SHEQ risk assessments. Let me explain. How many of you refer to your workplace risk assessments as your HIRA, where you follow a two-step process, namely hazard identification and risk assessment only? You see, there is actually a crucial third step that often gets ignored during the so-called HIRA process, namely hazard analysis or hazard evaluation. Hazards constantly interact with each other, and it's through this constant interaction of hazards that different levels of risk are created. You will therefore only be able to accurately predict such risk if you understand the unique characteristics of hazards and how they interact with each other. So without further delay, let's look at the characteristics of hazards. Firstly, all hazards consist of matter in the form of a solid, liquid, gas, or plasma. Can you think of anything that exists and that comes in the form of a solid, a liquid, a gas, or plasma that does not have the potential to harm you? All hazards are governed by natural laws such as Einstein's theory of relativity or Newton's laws of gravity and motion. All hazards have symmetry. All hazards have weight. All hazards have volume and size. All hazards have density. All hazards have shape. All hazards have a surface or texture. All hazards have potential or kinetic energy. When hazards come into contact with one another, they usually interact, and when they interact, some form of energy exchange occurs. In actual fact, it is the energy of a hazard that creates risk in any given situation. And lastly, all hazards interact with other hazards. Let me repeat, hazards are not exposed to other hazards, they interact with other hazards, and when they interact, some form of reciprocal energy exchange occurs. Interaction usually refers to something that is given, felt, or done in return, whereas exposure usually refers to a one-sided vulnerability, which is not necessarily always true in the case of hazards. Simply put, a workplace hazard is therefore any tangible object that has the potential to cause harm due to its ability to move on its own or to be moved by another force. The ability of a hazard to move on its own or to be moved by another force is also often referred to as the closing and collision potential of a hazard. There are three types of hazards, namely single hazards, compound hazards, and multiple hazards. All three are often grouped together as physical hazards, chemical hazards, or even biological hazards, but in the end, due to their unique compositions, they remain either single, compound, or multiple hazards. Without going into too much detail, here is a brief description of each type of hazard. A single hazard is any object that is a pure element on the periodic table of natural elements. Examples of such elements that are hazards are pure iron, pure lead, pure oxygen, and pure nitrogen. A compound hazard is created when two or more elements on the periodic table of natural elements, also known as single hazards, are chemically joined. Examples of compound hazards are water, paint, and metal alloys such as those found in metal hand tools. A multiple hazard is a combination of any type of single or compound hazard that interact with other hazards on the basis of their combined characteristics. Examples of multiple hazards are electrical hand tools, forklifts, or scaffolds. If you are ever unsure whether any natural element, object, or substance is a hazard, benchmark it against the characteristics of hazards that I mentioned in the previous slides. If it is tangible, if it can move on its own or be moved by another force, and it can harm you, it is a hazard. So where does this leave us as human beings? In short, we as human beings have all the inherent characteristics of hazards that I explained previously. We have mass, symmetry, density, surface, shape, and energy. We are undoubtedly governed by natural laws, and above all, we interact with other hazards and therefore pose the risk to other hazards. Human beings are therefore hazards. Our acts, on the other hand, are not hazards, as not all our acts have the potential to cause harm. What sets us apart from all other hazards is the fact that we have minds of our own. Due to this unique characteristic, human behavior is often inconsistent and unpredictable, with high levels of health and safety risk. As a result, human beings and their interactions with other hazards should always be at the heart of all your risk assessments. Now that you know what hazards are, let's wrap up the lesson with what hazards are not. As already stated, human acts are not hazards, as not all human acts have the potential to cause harm. Situations are not hazards, as situations are merely abstract creations of the human mind. Situations can only be classified as hazardous when tangible objects with the potential to cause harm are present in them. And last but not least, departures from the normal are also not hazards. Not wearing PPE, for example, can therefore not be classified as a hazard either. Remember the following saying, as it always applies to hazards: once a hazard, always a hazard. Something cannot be classified a hazard the one day and then not a hazard the next day due to the ever-changing human behavior or circumstances. This brings us to the end of the lesson. Feel free to get in touch with me should you ever need the services of an independent SHEQ consultant or trainer. I provide these services at affordable rates wherever there is a need, and I would like to hear from you. Thank you for watching. God bless and stay safe.